are back. Stand by. I can't get it in the pinball channel. I can't get it in the pinball channel. Ooh. I can't get it in the pinball channel. Remix. We're gonna go for it anyway, alright, y'all. Alright. We are back with a super live. We are live at PinTech Live. I got coil dust on my thumb. We are just returned a few days ago from Golden State Pinball Festival. We did 2 solid days of Pinball University seminars. Saturday we had 7 awesome seminars from tech repair to pinball history, tournament gameplay tips for kids with the little flippers, and looking inside a Spike 2 system, looking inside a P3 multimorphic system, which that was really intense, heavy, and very innovative. But we are back. We'll get to doing some cool tech troubleshooting starting next week again. And today I wanted to play 2 of the seminars. They are being processed. All the seminars are being processed and will live on our Marco Pinball YouTube channel probably by this weekend. But for now, these are some of the exciting ones I wanted to play for y'all since we're here. For those who need to do some shopping, our free domestic ground shipping and $10 off international shipping for orders over $99 code is PT-PINU. I will write that in the chat shortly, but it is for orders over $99. I don't know where that little disclaimer went, but you guys know the deal. Our secret PinTech live code. We're about to go into a long weekend for Memorial Day, and we are closed on Monday. So just a heads up, if it takes an extra day or so to get your parts, it's because the nation is in a bit of a shutdown to observe Memorial Day. I need some chat boxes so I can see y'all. I'm sorry. Let's check this out. Where's my chat? There y'all are. Hi. Oh, it's about getting crazy. Echo? Oh, yes. I believe that it is probably an echo. Enjoy the break. Yeah, we'll still be working, but I'm glad you guys are here. So first, we're going to play 2 seminars. during the stream. They're both about 60 minutes long. The first one will be all about Pointy people art. So this is Jerry Kelly and Christian Marche artwork. You recognize they're the ones that have like the pointy elbows and all this abstract art. So Michael Sheese and Evan Philippi from the Pacific Pinball Museum do a really great breakdown of the history of that. So we're going to watch that first, and then we're going to roll right into this exploring the Spike 2 system. And this was cool because Kyle came out to Golden State. And by the way, we're excited to do some PinTech lives together again in the future, so stay tuned for that. But him and Chris Kuntz, Pinball Pirate, legendary, teamed up together to just open up the Spike 2 system, talk about like how the node boards work and everything, and give some really awesome troubleshooting tips. I'm gonna play that one a little bit later, just so later on during this time frame, we get a bit more viewers. So enjoy the Pointy People seminar. It was really good, y'all. All right, let's try it out.
Well, thank you for coming, everybody. We are representing the Pacific Pinball Museum. My name is Evan Philippi. I'm the executive director, and with me is Michael Sheese. He's one of the founders of the Pacific Pinball Museum. And we wanted to say thank you to Marco and the Pinball University for inviting us for this special talk today. We really appreciate the ability to extend our museum out to people who may not have been able to visit yet. And we see a lot of volunteers and supporters of the museum in the audience, which we really appreciate. And we'll start with our first slide. It's just a little discussion about what the Pacific Pinball Museum is. We are a true 501c3 nonprofit museum. We don't just have pinball games to play. We also have artwork, exhibits, information cards. We have our museum laid out chronologically from oldest to newest machines. And we've operated in Alameda for about 22 years. So we're excited that we're entering a new decade. We had our 20th anniversary, and we have a lot of dreams for the future. And being able to come and talk to folks is one of the ways we can talk about the different things we can do in the future if we have support for the museum. On our next slide, we can talk a little bit about what the museum has. On the next one. Oh, is it actually live? Oh, cool. Wonderful. So for the museum, we have two different locations. The main museum, which is in Alameda, which has 103 playable pins. You'll see that on the left. That's the exterior, our history room, and our modern room. That's where we have the games arranged chronologically, and it's only a small portion of our museum that we're able to bring out to folks. On the right, you'll see our Pacific Pinball Annex. That's in an old aircraft maintenance hangar on the former Alameda Naval Air Station, about 1.5 miles from the museum, and that's where the bulk of our collection is. We have over 1,200 pins there, in addition to the 100 that we have in the museum itself. As far as we know, we have the largest collection, an institutional collection that's available, and the idea is to make sure that these rotate out and they're available to the public to enjoy, no matter the age or era of the machine, whether it's from the 1940s to the 2020s. And as such, we're always fundraising and looking for a larger building. We're kind of maxed out in Alameda, our location. We can only really have about 105 games in that location. So we really do need a larger facility to bring more games to the public. And that's really our goal, is to make sure that those are available to people to play, see, and learn about. So as a nonprofit, we're always talking to people about fundraising. If people have connections with buildings, can put us in connections with the right people, because we are, as a nonprofit, able to offer tax breaks to people if they were to sell a building or coordinate with us. So please keep your eyes and ears open and feel free to reach out to us at any time. The Pointy People exhibit that we're talking about today has been in the museum since 2020. It opened in fall. It was our first kind of pandemic post-COVID exhibit that we opened when we reopened the museum. We were closed for 14 months. This exhibit is really important to us. It was really special. No one had done it before. And we have some pictures below of people enjoying those 10 games that we have in the exhibit. it's really nice that we have this opportunity to talk to everyone about Pointy People, because that exhibit will be leaving the museum at the end of this month. It's going to be archived. It's not going away forever. We expect to be able to bring it out to folks again in a couple of years. But this is a great time to not only enjoy this presentation, but to come to the museum and see the exhibit while the games are still there being played. I'm going to hand this over to Mike, whose real passion is Pointy People. Very educated and very learned about it and very passionate about that subject. And he'll take us through the next slides.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Yeah. Thanks, Evan. Yeah, Pointy People. Who doesn't love Pointy People? I got into this. That's actually a picture of my first game, Gulfstream. And I really wanted the Gottlieb, but they were too expensive, and Pointy People were the only game I could afford, because people didn't really appreciate the Pointy People back then. I have since got a real appreciation for them. There are two Pointy People artists, Jerry Kelly and Christian Marche, and a lot of people confuse them. They don't know, who's doing the artwork. This first slide kind of points to how different they were. I mean, Jerry Kelly was, you had to look quite a long time to see what it was that he was portraying, whereas Christian Marche was basically just knocking them out, and it was a lot easier to see what was going on. Is it that one? There we go. So I got to take it back to the beginning of pinball art, which was started with George Malenton. He was actually the first artist hired by Advertising Posters back in 1933 or 34. And immediately following that, the other place that was cranking out pinball playfields, and this is all silkscreen business, was Roy Parker, and he worked for another company called Reproduction Graphics. So they were in competition with each other, but the way it worked is you went to Advertising Posters or Reproduction Graphics, they did the artwork for your machine. So you told them what you wanted, they cranked it out. Roy Parker was quite a bit older than Malenton. Malenton, I think, started when he was 19 and worked all night on a presentation for David Roccola, brought it in, and they pretty much hired him. This is during the Depression, too, so he got, I think, $25 for his first piece of artwork, which just floored him, because that was a lot of money back then. They continued to be the kings of pinball art for quite a while. You can kind of see the difference between their art with Doo-Wah Diddy on the bottom by George Malenton and Robin Hood, actually Lady Robin Hood. Totally different styles in terms of George Malenton was more of a fashion, came from kind of using fashion magazines for source material. And I don't know where Roy Parker got his inspiration, but Lady Robin Hood. And this continued all the way. They were the kings of pinball art until 1964. At that point, Roy Parker was was ill, and Advertising Poster had actually taken over the whole business of silkscreening pinball playfields and pinball backglass and plastics, mainly because Reproduction Graphics burned down in the 30s, and then it rebuilt and it burned down again in the 50s. And at that point, they just closed their doors. Roy Parker moved over to Advertising Posters, and George Malenton was, by 1960, he became the head of the art department. So he was technically Roy Parker's boss. Both of these gentlemen cranked out quite a bit of art. It's kind of astounding when you go through the records and look at how much they did. Again, Roy Parker was always kind of doing, I hate to use the word cheesecake, but a lot of it was that nature. Gottlieb was fairly conservative, but they knew what their market was, and they wanted to appeal to women, to men, using not pinup, but more or less cheesecake models. Whereas Malenton would always go after the fashion models. You can kind of see just through the artwork between Zigzag, and Skyline, which are about the same years. Parker was always a little stiff, and he was exclusive to Gottlieb, although he did do a lot of Chicago coin. So when he was getting sick, I guess advertising posters started freaking out and going, we need another artist. So they brought in Art Stenholm, and this is a little controversial because not everybody agrees with this. Oh, thank you. But if you look at North Star, it's a combination between Roy Parker and Art Stenholm. You can tell by the guitar that the Eskimo, or actually he's the Navy guy, that's a feature you only find in Art Stenholm. And then Art Stenholm eventually replaced Roy Parker and did exclusive to Gottlieb. He started out, though, doing Williams and Bally. So it's kind of odd how they usually tested a new artist out with Chicago coin, I think, because they were kind of bottom of the barrel, and it's like they didn't really, this is a personal observation, they didn't seem to care as much about the artwork as Williams and Bally did. So they would always try a new artist out. I've noticed this. They would always do a Chicago coin. So after Roy Parker died, Millenton started tapering off doing artwork too. And so this is where Jerry Kelly comes in. So Harry Williams was instrumental. They call him the godfather of modern pinball. He invented so many things, and he came up with incredible designs, but they were always second to Gottlieb. Gottlieb was the king for the longest time. Lynn Durant and Harry Williams were friends before the war, and during the war they formed a company where they refurbished the pinball machines because they weren't allowed to make new pinball machines. So they'd refurbish them to Victory Pinball, anything doing with the war. They did a lot of controversial ones with that too, but we won't go into that. And I guess Harry Williams and Lynn Durant were very close friends. Lynn Durant was an excellent electrical engineer and designed most of these games. And after the war, they split up. And supposedly, the rumor was it was over a woman, and Lynn Durant won. I guess he got the girl, but he remained a bachelor, and it got him into trouble eventually. And that the paragraph to the right there is actually taken off of a news clipping from a newspaper about Lynn Durant getting, he just got into trouble because he was always, he's apparently giving away Cadillacs to ladies, etc. And so through tax evasion, he ended up in jail. And this is where Williams, the company Williams, bought all of United. And part of that package was Jerry Kelly, who was one of their main designers. So at this point, Harry Williams wasn't even taking care, wasn't in charge of Williams Industry. It was bought by Seabird, and they continued to run it as Williams Electronics. So Jerry Kelly comes over to Williams and is designed their logo and designed Bally's logo. He also designed a few things for Bally, which we'll talk about later. But he came from Chicago Art Institute, so he was a bona fide artist. He's also an industrial designer. So he immediately got to work and wanted to change pinball because when he was at United, United was just cranking out very similar looking machines. And he was the first one to say, hey, you know, this is boring. You need to change this and change it up. At that point, he went over to Williams. So that infection spread over to Williams, and he pleaded with them to, like, let's do something new. You know, up until this point, pinball art was pretty stale. I mean, Gottlieb was the king, and it was very tame stuff. They just weren't taking any chances. It's hard to say why exactly, but the time was ripe for some new art. So here comes Jerry Kelly, and he designs this game Pot of Gold. And you really had to seriously look at this for quite a while to even figure out what the heck was going on. A lot of people even miss some of these things. Like if you can see in the very center, right under pot of gold, there's a ship in there. There's a prow of a ship. And there's a hole in the side of the ship, and there's coins spilling out of the bottom. And that was actually part of the game, because at the end of each ball, it would fire a little bagatelle ball that would go down the pins and give you 100, 300, 500 points. So Jerry Kelly worked a lot with Ted Zale when he went to Bally, but for Williams, he wanted to actually control the whole game, the design of the art and the design of the game. So he got his way a few times where he got to put in things that were really congealing the whole art theme and the game. So this was the very first Pointy people, and as you can see, they really are Pointy. So at this point, Williams said, "Wow, that worked pretty well. Let's do another one." So he did a go-go and took the Pointy part up a notch, I'd say. And the thing that was great was these games were selling. So 5,000 games back then, that was quite a lot. So they knew they had a winner with Jerry Kelly. So they kept him going. You got to kind of compare this to some of the other games that were coming out. Nobody used pink in a game. And so the colors and just all the geometric design was really new and fresh. And some people made, fun of the fact that they were so out there. But a lot of people really enjoyed these games. So then after a certain point, Bally went, this is pretty unique stuff, and these guys have a real winner here. And they did what Gottlieb did. They made a contract up for Jerry Kelly, making him an exclusive to Bally, so he could no longer do Williams games. And this was his next one, Capersville, which I honestly, it's amazing artwork, but I never have figured out the actual gameplay behind this one. It has some little thing about the code, but it's all about spying and underwater. You'll find a lot of underwater themes in Jerry Kelly stuff. For some reason, scuba divers are in at least 3 of his machines. That's probably just part of the theme that he liked to do. Again, it's all very angular. And you really have to look at some of these things for quite a while to figure out what's going on. There's a little submarine there, and there's another type flying submarine that's in there. You can always just stare at these things. And I guess part of the philosophy of this is if you have a 4-player game, there's maybe 3 players that aren't playing, and so they get to look at the back glass and try to figure out the artwork. So they lose Jerry Kelly. Advertising posters, it's hard to say how that worked out because I have not been able to find out who worked with Jerry Kelly. Did he work at advertising posters or did he work at Bally? I can't really answer that. But I do know that they had hired Christian Marche, and he was a Frenchman who'd come over there, and they hired him, according to his records, in '64. And he was doing Williams and I think Chicago Coin. His probably the first artwork he did was Shangri-La. This is according to Christian Marche's little memos. But there was another game called Beatniks. It's not a Pointy people, but it's Chicago Coin. And I think they were trying him out with Chicago Coin first. So, but Shangri-La, if you look at Shangri-La, would you ever guess that was done by the same artist that did the Pointy people? I mean, it's very detailed. It's not his style at all, but it kind of proves to the fact that he really was an incredibly talented artist. So it dispels the myth that he was just lazy. he just happened to be really quick. And when they asked him, hey, people really like this modern design, these pointy people, they didn't call it that back then, can you do that style? And of course he could, and he really adapted to it well. So the first game for Bally was by Jerry Kelly was Surfers, and the first game that Christian Marche did was Shangri-La, and then shortly after that, within 4 games, he started doing Pointy People. So his first Pointy People was Derby Day, which to me really isn't that pointy, but it's pointy enough. I think the main thing to take away from here is he started developing the style of the called paper cut, where you just cut out pieces of paper and paste them up there, and you make an image, kind of like mosaic. And the reason that was really popular was because if you know what silk screening is all about, it's you've got 5, 6, or more screens that you're dealing with that all have to register. Each one is basically a pass of color. So really lends itself to pieces of paper being cut up and assembled to make a picture. This is probably why Christian Marche was just excelled at this, because he was very good at doing that style of art. His second game was Jolly Roger, and then again, that one isn't as pointy as I'd like it to be. But then you get into Doozy, and it starts getting even pointier. But Doozy, to me, I always thought looked like a car ad for a European car. And he was French, so I think there's a little bit to that. Then you get to Misso, and Misso was kind of a funny one. Misso was originally supposed to be Miss Q, like Miss Q's the guy who's breaking his cue stick. But in French, Q means butt or ass. It's slang for ass. And so Christian Marche was like, oh, I can't do that. And so he changed it to O, but he had to go and tell him why. He said, well, that means, Miss Butt. You don't want that on your pinball machine. So they all laughed and went, okay, Frenchie. And they changed it to Misso. But I thought it was kind of interesting because he still kind of featured the blonde that has a kind of prominent butt. But I love these. He starts getting into, I think, but by the time he got to Misso, he's pretty comfortable with doing pinball art because he's starting to put jokes in it. And you got to remember that he was inspired by Jerry Kelly. And Jerry Kelly, if you look at his stuff, he puts a lot of little jokes in the artwork, and you really have to look at it to see what's going on. So then Kelly's now working full-time for Bally. And this is kind of the unfortunate part of the story. Jerry Kelly does some amazing compositions. I'd like to point to Mini Zag. Mini Zag's got so much energy in it, and it's all current themed. You've got some English band, or it could be Paul Revere and the Raiders. It could be the Rolling Stones, but it's a TV show, featuring these rock bands. And the women that he would draw are really ethnic for the most part. They don't look like your typical American women. They look exotic. And he also would do this thing. He does this a lot with balloons and in this case it's the lights, and it fit right into this feature that Bally was promoting, this carryover feature where you'd have to do light up, I think, Mini Zag, and then after you did that, it would light up one of the lights. And once you got all the lights lit up to 9, then it would pop off 3 games. So this carried over from game to game. So a lot of people would come up and if the lights were on 8, then you knew you had a really good chance to actually win 3 games. So it was kind of a neat feature. In this one in particular, He has these little jokes because it's a live TV broadcast, and the cameraman is actually focused on the dancing girls' butts. Why is this thing with pinball? But if you look at the play field, it carries over. Like it's kind of interesting. He'd take something off the back glass and incorporated the joke even further onto the play field. I'd love to tell you more, but you're going to have to see our show before it goes. Dogies is so confusing. I mean, you really have to look at that one for a long time. It's very hard to explain. But in there is a cowboy that's falling off his horse, and he's shooting a gun, just barely missing the other rider in the background. And I mean, you really have to look at it. And it's kind of a different style completely. It's not paper cutout per se, because he graduated from Chicago Art Institute. I'm sure he was doing fine art. So he was not used to really silkscreen art, and you can tell that in the way that he draws stuff, because he used too fine of a line and actually get lost in the reproduction by the silkscreen. There's a head of hair on the cowboy. You can't even make it out because it's so fine. So meanwhile, Marche is just cranking them out. What happened with Jerry Kelly was, unfortunately, he did 13 games, I think 14 variations, but not too many. He lasted till 1969, and Valley shut him down. Meanwhile, Christian Marche has taken off, and he's excelling at doing pointy people. One of my favorite ones is Op Pop Pop, where I just love the fact he's feeling this the blonde woman's hair, and he's squeezing the paint out on the canvas. And then the lady in the background with the striped red shirt, who's doing the classic artist pose, and she's got if you see her paintbrush, she's got some green paint on that brush. If you look at the canvas, there's green paint dripping off the very corner of it. So he's kind of making fun of modern art, that they're just kind of like very representational. And there's a little Calder mobile in the very top there, as a reference to Andrew Calder. Paddock is really amazing in terms of it's not the pointiness, but more or less the abstraction of like the horse into just geometric shapes and swaths of color, and the whole background. There is no background, it's just blank. So he really does a composition where you just focus on this horse who's grabbing the lady's hat. Another example is like Bolo. All these people are kind of like in jazz mode. They're just perpetually, So I always loved that. I used to walk through the museum like that. Oops. So Marche kept improving this whole thing to where the pointy people kind of took on an art that was simplistic and yet told a story and was immediately recognizable, as opposed to Jerry Kelly, which you really had to stare at. And I don't know if that's why Jerry Kelly got dismissed so early, but I knew that Christian Marche was really quick, and so these guys are cranking out products, so you have to take that into account. He could really crank out the art. He did over 150 pinball machines, and that's not including the gun games and the bowlers that he did for United and all the work for Chicago Coin on the side. He did a lot of work. In fact, he was the third most prolific pinball artist next to George Maletin and Roy Parker. I think the next one who falls in is is Gordon Morrison. And one really weird fact that I found out was apparently advertising posters had one big studio, and they had two artists that would have to share that studio. The other artist was Gordon Morrison. So you got Jerry Kelly doing Pointy People on one side, and then you got Gordon Morrison doing his thing. And they're both artists, so they both influence each other. And I got to look at some of their personal art. And it's funny because Gordon Morrison was doing abstract stuff that you'd attribute to Christian Marche. And Christian Marche was grabbing some of Gordon Morrison's influence in his personal art. What they mainly did in their personal lives, for their private art, nudes. Pretty much all. That's pretty much all they did. Probably because they couldn't do it for the Pinball Museum. So Christian Marche just keeps cranking them out. Like I said, 150 games, and about half of them, about 70 machines, were Pointy People machines. So Bally High, just Pointy to the max, and then Doodlebug is, I'm not going to say psychedelic, but he's trying to get there. He's trying to get the psychedelic. And I had no idea. I looked at that Doodlebug that they're writing, and I'm just, I don't know, pretty crazy stuff. Star Pool I thought was really interesting because it's like the first, the early game, Miss O. Again, Miss O has this blonde in it that is kind of getting all the attention, and all the guys playing pool are looking at her. Kind of carries through the same thing with this one, Star Pool. You've got the lady who's right next to the red vested guy. If you look at her other hand, she's holding the ball. So she's stolen one of the balls, and she's actually a player because she's holding an acoustic also. And the other lady behind her that looks pissed off, she knows what's going on. The other lady is looking at the ball in her hand, so she knows what's going on, but the guys are oblivious. And the real coincidence is Christian Marche was hired by George Mlenton, and they hit it off immediately. They used to spend lunch together once a week, and so they were friends. Besides working, they were friends on the outside. And one of his games that he did before he stopped doing artwork he stopped in '64. I'm sorry, this is in '54. He did another game called Star Pool, and again, it was women playing pool. I think, not sure, I can't back any of this up, but it sounds like he asked Christian Marche, hey, why don't you do a Star Pool like I did? And so that was the last Pointy People that came out of the whole genre. So again, back to Gulfstream, which was one of my favorite ones. And it took me a while to like this one, but boy, once I got into it, I realized, wow, yeah, the composition is pretty amazing. And his use of colors, it was really different, from what Gottlieb was doing and Chicago Coin. It just seemed this was pretty far out there. Another one that's actually, it's the same game, only it has one extra lane up top, is OXO, which is probably one of his most famous Pointy People. Now that is probably the most Pointy People game, and for some reason everybody seems to like that one. The artwork doesn't bother them. It's real psychedelic. It's fluorescent inks, and I've never figured out why that one is acceptable to a lot of people that don't like Pointy People. And then this is my favorite one. This is the one that sold me on Pointy People art. When I saw it double up, my heart flipped. I mean, it's like actionism and cubism. It's pretty crazy. Plus, I did have one of those motorcycles when I was a kid. My dad and I tried it. It was a two-stroke, and he actually represented it pretty faithfully, especially the smoke, because it was a two-stroke. So two strokes just let out a god-awful amount of smoke when you drove them. Yeah, my wife and I rode motorcycles a lot, and I could really relate to that one. It just had all the right elements and the colors and just everything on that. They unfortunately only made like 80 of these, and I was fortunate to get one for the museum. So back to Jerry Kelly. This is one of his first for Bally, was surfers. And here's one that has a lot of jokes in it, and I'll just tell you. But I want to point out the side art on it, with the surfer riding that big long plank is just so Jerry Kelly. It's just like, well, how can I represent this using the minimal amount of information? Which I really find that fascinating, because like how much ink can you save and still represent something? You know? But he always managed to get these jokes in. And again, you got the balloons there that are tied into this carryover thing. But if you look at the backlash, you'll see there's a pelican with something in his mouth, and that is the top for the brunette lady's bikini that he's holding in his mouth. And then there's a blind person that's selling balloons, but he's not blind because he's checking out her butt. I don't know what it is about these butt things, but they're there. I can't deny them. Then if you go to the playfield, he actually carries his joke over on the playfield. Now you see the pelican is on, sorry. He's sitting on that the roof of that thing that's floating, and he's got something again in his mouth, but it's her bottom. It's the bottom of her bikini, because she's wearing the top. So I don't know how that happened, but the other thing is that he was really into designing and integrating the theme with the play. So in this one, it's if you look at the playfield, it's all blue. It's like it's water. So his theory is that the ball is a surfer, and he's surfing down the playfield. And when he hit a ball on something like this has a midway piece of plastic that guides the ball, and it actually swoops it over on the left and swoops it over to the right, and it really has this whole motion of like surfing and waves. And then he's got these little zipper flippers that because he's working with Ted Zale on most of these games. So the mushroom bumpers close the zipper flippers and make for some pretty incredible playing. It's a great game. It's one of my favorites of his. And then a go-go. A go-go is just like a party on a pinball machine. I mean, it's great. You get all these. That guy looks like the guy in the center of the go-go backlash looks like Wolfman Jack. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but yeah, the dancers are just going crazy. I love the guy with the headphones. He's bent over backwards in impossible positions. And I think this is something that Christian Marche kind of borrowed from Jerry Kelly. I don't think he came up with that by himself. Then you get something like Rock Makers, which is slightly pointy. And my wife and I have stared at this one trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And I completely ignored the title, Rock Makers. So it looks like the guys aren't working at all, but all the women have harnessed the power of these dinosaurs. And what are they doing? They're making rocks. I don't know why. That doesn't make any sense. But I just always thought this one was pretty funny. And the playfield is just like so barren of anything, you know. It's kind of surprising that he would do something that barren of anything. But he was really in his minimalist stage, I guess. So this is two very different styles, as you can see. One, you really have to dig out the visual content in Dogies. You really have to look at that one. And it's a little more organic than what Christian Marche does, but he kind of lost, you have to struggle with it. And so it wouldn't always be obvious what's going on. Zip-a-doo, it's right the height of the psychedelic era, and the gal's wearing paisley. And the funny thing about Christian Marche is, yeah, he did pointy people, but he always made it round where it counted. And I won't say anything further than that. So this was interesting. Christian Marche loved Jerry Kelly. He really had a lot of respect for him. And I didn't notice this for the longest time. And then one day I was looking at, here's Champ, right? And he's doing a similar thing that Gottlieb, that Art Stenholm did, where you put the back glass of the game on the game. So he's got, they're playing Champ, right? And in the Champ back glass, you see, oh, there's another back glass of Champ. But then you look at the other, so I always looked at that. I never looked at the other games. If you look at the other games, you'll see they're all Jerry Kelly games. The first one is, where's that? Well, I know what the Mini Zag is the third one. And you just find the, you have to go through all your Jerry Kelly games, but they're all Jerry Kelly games. And it was his tribute that he did in 1974, and it was right near when he did the last Pointy People, and that was his tribute to Jerry Kelly. Jerry Kelly, on the other hand, couldn't stand Marche, and actually made a point to tell people that he didn't do Mariner, and he's tired of people attributing that piece of crap art, to him. He was really offended by this. And it's kind of sad. I can actually look at it, out of all the Christian Marche games, that one is particularly close to the way that Jerry Kelly would do something, but it's pretty obvious it's not. One thing, you can look at the pointy hands and see how they're different. Jerry Kelly just did them differently. Plus, you can always see what's going on in a Christian Marche, and with Jerry Kelly, you really have to struggle. But he did borrow some of the things like the scuba divers and the fins for that one. So I can see why people would confuse it, but he did not like that. And I think that's it.
Wanted to say, yeah.
Sorry for the abrupt ending.
No, it's okay. Every game that you saw in the presentation is actually in the museum's collection. We either have them for play in the museum as part of the existing exhibit for Pointy People, or in the regular history room continuously because they're popular games and important games of pinball. And the rest are in our large collection that we have out in the warehouse. The pictures that you saw for the presentation are part of a project that we've continued on, that we started during the pandemic when we were closed, which is our photography preservation project. That's something that was financed internally within the museum. We have a special corner set up with color-corrected lighting, a really special setup, a good photographer, great lenses, and we made sure to photograph the heads, the play fields, and a three-quarter view of each of these games for posterity. In some cases, some of these games don't exist in any sort of form other than in someone's personal collection or in our collection, and making sure we digitize things and preserve them for the future is really integral to our mission as a museum, to try to preserve and bring these things to the public forever. So definitely, if you have an opportunity, please come to the museum to see this exhibit before it leaves. We will still have Pointy People games throughout, but we'll be losing the main exhibit for a very special replacement exhibit that will be coming in, that we'll have a press conference about, that we'll be talking about social media. So definitely pay attention to that for the future. We did want to, it looks like we've got a couple minutes. We did want to open up the floor to Q&A, either about Pointy people or the museum in general, for the little bit of time we have. Manu.
Well, it depends on the game. You know, sometimes, yeah, they're not related at all. Jerry Kelly probably did it almost half of the time, you know. And when you say that theme, follow, you know, the art, the prime example for me is Fireball, because Fireball is throwing balls at you on the back glass, and that's what happens when you play it. You get that spinner thing that nauseates most players. So, yeah.
When did the style? When was the last Pointy people game that you point at?
That was 74.
74?
Yeah.
Okay.
Starpool, yeah. Yeah, that was his last one. Now he kept working, doing artwork. He just didn't do any more Pointy people. Yeah. Hey, Kuntz. Ooh. You want to field that one?
That's a really great question. It's a Herculean effort to move that many games to another location, set them up, level them, make sure they play okay, and then retrieve them from that location. We would very much like to run expos, and we're looking for a space where we could store the collection and run an expo each year. And it would be a location that could do both. And we could have them all preserved, climatically preserved and controlled, and open that up maybe once a year without having to move that many games out to another location. It would allow us to have more as well. So definitely stay tuned for that. And that's definitely part of the fundraising that we do in reaching out and talking about future plans with folks. We would like to start doing shows again.
Yes,
sir.
Hey, Mike,
Girl.
I was trying to follow along with your pictures on my phone because I couldn't see the detail on the screen. And so I'm going to Jay's Internet pinball database, and you've got them photographed on it. It's not saying submit all of yours, but how? See if Jay can host some of your pictures that are better detailed than what he has, because some of his are
Yeah.
really old.
Just that's been brought up before. We'd like to do our own presentation, so we haven't shared them with the IPDB. Partly because there's constraints on us as a nonprofit as to what we can do. So we have to put our own content onto these pictures before we can. I don't know if you noticed, but IPDB has a bunch of things at the bottom of each page. Yeah, um, and so we want to tell our own story. We're on a totally different, well, not totally different, but it's a different way of looking at pinball, and the content we want to provide is much different. I tried, we tried working with them a little bit, but and we have given them photos, but this is a series of, as you can see, it's like a backglass, playfield, and three-quarter shot that we've done for about half of our collection. And it was pretty monumental to do that during the pandemic. So we put a lot of work into it. So we've actually integrated it into a site, but it's not ready for prime time yet. There's a whole idea, and this is why we don't want to put it on IPDB. The whole idea behind what we're doing is comparison. You'll be able to pull up one playfield and compare it to another playfield. Zoom in on them, put them side by side, search using art terms and different terminology than you'd find on IPDB. But the main thing would be able to call up different pinball machines and compare the art.
And I think that's great and all, but a lot of us use the database as a resource of what it should be originally. What it should be, and also just study it closer if we're touching up or whatever.
The software we're planning on using is the same software for navigation and zooming that's used for different national art galleries and groups. It's actually a government-supported software and navigation system that will be higher quality than any uploading of images to a site to click on would be.
Jay, I'm not saying to provide your best photos or anything, but to replace some of his low resolution stuff with something a little bit better would be a good public service.
Absolutely. I think we're open to talking with them for sure.
Patience, my friend, patience. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Has the, or did the pointy art style find its way into any medium or advertising or art other than music?
You know, if you look at some of the commercial art from that era, yeah, you know, in terms of modern art, it was about 30 years behind the times. You know, when you compare what was happening in France, you know, in modern art, and that style actually first came out. So pinball was about 30 years behind the curve. But American advertising started getting that kind of simplistic look at that point, you know, where um, it's an example like
You really see it in signage, I think,
yeah,
from the 60s to the early 70s. Even the really famous Las Vegas sign, Welcome to Las Vegas, I think is a good example of a Pointy people influenced their type of art, which is really simple but just extraordinarily geometric.
yeah, the boomerang, you know, the boomerang thing and geometric shapes, yeah,
And even shows like, I think the Jetsons is very Pointy people.
yeah. Yeah, it kind of spilled over into cartoons. Like Hanna-Barbera got away from total realism and just went with more simplistic designs of their characters. You know, so they weren't pointy. That was unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, last question.
Kyle.
Hi guys. Hey, do you think that like Valley's emphasis on like contemporary art and presenting something like way different than their competitors is like something that was baked in DNA, right? For being like the first pinball company or amusement company that had an internal art team, right? Do you think that that was an important part of their DNA?
You know, it's interesting. You read their contract, and they turned over all design aspects to Jerry Kelly. All design aspects of it. So he wasn't, you know, he designed their logo. Jerry Kelly kind of bragged about how he had Valley bigwigs come to his studio in Chicago, and they had to step over the drunks on his, you know, that were hanging out in his stairway. They had to step past, you know, these people to come up into his studios, and they made these $1 million deals, you know, and he had this original painting of the Valley Harlequin. So he went on to probably made them quite a bit of money. It was an industrial designer, so he designed. There's a slot machine called the Money Honey, and he designed their bezel. Chris Kuntz loves to talk about this all the time because you don't even think about this stuff. You know, it's a mechanical design, and it made that machine so popular. That's why it got the name Money Honey. And it was just a design where he redid the where the coins come out, which was, I guess, really small before. And he just made it huge. So people would think, oh man, there's going to be so much money coming out of this thing. They had to put a big old mouth on it, you know. So, yeah, I find it really curious. I'd love to know why they got rid of him. My theory is that he wanted more money. Apparently, he was making deals. Yeah.
Well, we'll yield the floor for the next group, but we just wanted to say thanks again to Marco and Pinball University. Please come check out the show while it's still at the museum. And please check out the other talks we have. We have so many friends and volunteers at the museum, which are up here today, and they're all going to be really worthwhile. So just really thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
pretty rad stuff, right? All right, we're going to play the Spike 2, Looking Inside. This is a really good one as well. Sorry for the delay in between.
Up or pass it around. Just come up
All right,
here
it's
and
gonna
take
start
it.
off with Kyle talking
I
about some
we
stuff,
kind of want to
and
keep
it's
this
gonna
like
get
an
into some
open dialogue.
goodness.
I want to give you like an overview and some other
Uh,
stuff.
Just how they talk about how the node boards work, and if something's not working on your Spike 2 game, how to troubleshoot it and track down where the source of the issue is coming from is just super invaluable information. We all love Kyle, and we had so much fun with him on PinTech Live when he was working with us at Marco. Now he's at Stern doing great things, and teamed up with pinball pirate Chris Kuntz, who is a legendary pinball technician. That's who Kyle trained under. It's just overall such an amazing seminar. I'm so grateful they took the time to do this, and hope they will do another seminar together next year, because this was definitely one of my favorite programs over the weekend. So check it out.
This isn't going to be like tech support, so you can't ask me like how to fix your game right now. Maybe if we run out of questions at the end, we can do that. But like any questions, please just raise your hand, and I want it to be a discussion, you know? It'll keep me less anxious. I don't know, should we wait for Chris, or should I just kind of, okay. My monologue? This is great. I'm very happy to be back here. It's fun. It's really hot outside. I don't like the heat. But thankfully it's windy today, so. There's Chris. So Chris and I first started working on the Spike 2 stuff when we became a Stern dealer, when I was still working with Chris in about 2016. So we've got about 10 years of Spike 2 experience now. You know, it's kind of funny to think it's like they're not new anymore. It's been 10 years. Nice. Everyone knows who Chris is, right? Okay. Okay, I need a mouse. Let's make it easier. I'm getting our samples out. Okay, so I'm going to start talking. I'm Kyle. My name's Kyle Spiteri. This is Chris Kuntz. I work at Stern Pinball, and Chris is the pinball pirate. He is the pinball pirate. Chris gave me a job in pinball and taught me basically everything I know. So if it wasn't for him, I would not be in the position I am now. So I owe so much to him. Thank you, Chris. And yeah, should we roll into this?
Yes.
Okay, let's start. Okay, Spike 2. This is a system that we, as Stern, debuted in 2016 with Batman or Aerosmith, whichever the first Spike 2 game was. So basically at the start of the LCD era, right? Before that, we had a similar system called Spike 1, which ran a dot matrix, very few games. Kiss, Game of Thrones, WrestleMania, Ghostbusters, but there's definitely some Bonelli. There's also like different iterations of some of that hardware that became standardized in what we have now with Spike 2. Spike 2 is different from some other traditional hardware systems you are more familiar with, right? So the way I kind of think about this is you have like centralized like computing and driving. So think about a System 11 board, right? It's this enormous silicone pizza that has a computer, it has hardware to drive lamps, to drive coils, to do switches, all on one giant board, right?
It is laughably inefficient by modern standards. You feel the heat coming out of it when you open the back box.
So this system is like what I would kind of call is like maybe like a decentralized system because the separate pieces are in different areas, right? So we can start with the back box overview. So there is a computer. The computer in the center of the back box really, it does all the thinking, it runs the program, and it sends instructions. There's not a lot of inputs on this, not a lot of outputs.
It's also doing the display and all the sound. So it's your soundboard, your display board, your computer, one small thing. And really, yeah, the computer is just this little thing in the middle.
Another thing about Spike 2. Well, let's keep right here. Sorry, I'm getting a little jumbled. I have a little bit of nerves. The only things in the back box, right? You've got your power supply. It's a switching DC power supply. These games run on 1 voltage. There is 115 volts coming into the game, and it outputs 48 volts DC. Everything in the game runs on 48 volts. Each node board or anything else in the game regulates its own voltages.
So if you have an LED or something that's 5 volts, that's made locally on that node board, so that the node board itself only has to receive 48 volts.
Mm-hmm. And all of that 48 volts is spread around by the power distribution board, the number 3 here, and what Chris is pointing to, that takes 48 volts from the power supply and splits it between a few locations. One being the head. The computer always needs 48 volts, or any other accessories, maybe like your topper or speaker lights or whatever. And then there's another plug that brings the power down to the playfield, and another one that brings it down to the cabinet.
You see these here. Here's power to the playfield. Here's power to the cabinet. There's an optional plug here in case you maybe have a topper or something else you want to do. Another nice thing about this is your dangerous voltage, the 115 volts. The only place it is in the game is in this corner of this metal box. You've got your fuse, and that's the only place you have voltage. That does require that the power switch be in a new location. It's up here under the head rather than in front.
That's another reason, right, is because that was for UL certification, right? It's keeping the actual high voltage, line voltage, away from where people can access it without a tool, right? So that is why that is all underneath that cover and why the power switch is underneath the head here now. We'll get into some specifics about the CPU on this page. So the CPU has some status indicators that can be really telling, right? So I said, or we were talking about how the 48 volts comes into the CPU and it regulates everything, or I'm sorry, yeah, it regulates other voltages it needs. So on the CPU, we have status lights, one for 48 volts in, one for the CMOS logic, 3.3 volts, one for TTL logic, 5 volts, 12 volts, VA and BNB, voltage audio, so the voltage required to run the amplifiers, and then voltage node bus. There is voltage regulated on the CPU that travels through those Cat5 cables that actually power the node bus.
It's about 10 volts, 9 volts.
Yeah, 9 volts DC. Then you've got on the CPU board itself, so the, do I have a mouse? Those two guys right there. One of those is 5 volts to the CPU, and the other one is like a I'm thinking or I'm doing something light that blinks. And then right above your Cat5 or the RJ45 like data ports, then for the node bus on the bottom right, you have the net bridge light. That means I am talking. If that is not lit, nothing is happening. Usually when that's not lit, you also won't have your node bus power. So let's see, I need to see what the next slide is. Okay, let's talk about like what the outputs on the CPU are. We'll just concentrate up here for a second before we get into some other stuff. Chris, pointed things.
Yes, I can do this if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll start here. This is the 48 volts coming in. It also receives a signal here to tell it whether the door is open. You might have noticed if I close the door, it turns power on. There were a few games made around 2017. They did some games that did not have the switch on the door. They're always live. There's a minor change on the power distribution board if you have some of the games made during that time. So yeah, it knows when the door's open or closed. It puts a message on here telling you that you have no power to anything else but the computer. This is the video out for the display here. It's LVDS. Oh, okay, this is better. This up here is actual Ethernet, which you won't use as much in your home unless you want to go hardwired instead of using your Wi-Fi to connect. There's HDMI, which is not used in this game, but Star Wars uses it, for example, to run the little display on the playfield. You have your SD card here with your software on it. You have these are the switches coming from the coin door. They are currently the only switches in the game that are active. If I actually press buttons, you'll see it responds because these are always live. They have a hotline directly from the door to the computer, whereas every other switch in the game gets power through a node board, and the node boards do not have power right now because the door is open. So, these down here, while they are RJ45 connectors, they are not Ethernet. Don't plug an Ethernet thing in these. This is your data out to the rest of the game. These are all in parallel, so it doesn't matter which one you plug where. One is going to the playfield, one's going to the cabinet, and we have a vacant one here in case you want to put in maybe speaker lights or a topper or whatever. Down here, this is speakers out. There's your cabinet speaker. Here's the head speakers. And anything else? Other things I'll point out, this game has a battery on it. I think new games are shipping with no battery.
Yeah, the battery, I've gotten questions about this, or people ask, it's like, oh, do I need to change the batteries on my Spike 2 game? No, the batteries don't do anything except for keep time and date. So if your game is connected to the internet, it pulls that from the server. The battery is not necessary on these games, and to be honest, like coin cell batteries generally are not as dangerous as like lead acid or alkaline batteries rather. So it's kind of, if your game has it, you don't.
Yeah, if you're online, you can just remove that. And in fact, I think the newest games are shipping without it. You can still add one if you like. There's the SIM card plugs in here, and you have a Wi-Fi dongle plugs in here. So if you're replacing the computer, you need to transfer these three things to your new computer.
Yeah, so to expand on that a little bit, the small SD card, the micro SD card on the CPU carrier, that is used for as a cache when you're downloading updates. It will download to that little card there, so you can continue playing, and then it will install the update off of that. But it is required for Insider Connected to run, so if you ever get a message on your game that says, it'll identify what it might be missing for it to connect online. It'll either give you a message about the Wi-Fi adapter or that little SD card. You might have to reseat it, right? Like when games ship and FedEx is not gentle with them, sometimes those things come loose. So another thing about SD cards, sorry, this is going to be kind of a bit of a brain dump because that's the only way I'm going to be able to convey this information. If you ever boot your game up, and let's go back a slide, two lights on the bottom, VA, VNB, if those are not lit, your SD card might not be seated. That is a symptom of the SD card not being seated, and customers will call and say, it's not working. Okay, what lights do you have? I don't have these. So take the SD card out, put it back in. Hey, it works now.
I'll point out it's normal for the first top, 5 or so to come on immediately as soon as the power supply is live. VA, that's the audio voltage, and VNB, node bus voltage, they only come on after the CPU gets to a certain point in the boot up process, and then you'll see them come on a little further in.
And one other note about Ethernet, the data cables, right? RJ45 cables for internet. It's also what we use to transfer data. I've had people do this. It's happened at shows before when people plug the Ethernet cable from their router into the node bus, and then the router smokes because you're introducing 9 volts back into the router where it's not needed.
But I don't care about the router. Did it hurt the game?
No.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah. That's the nice thing about this system is we'll kind of get into is that since it is a decentralized like control architecture, it hurts itself. It generally only hurts one board or itself. There are instances where it could be other things, but we'll get into that later. Okay, any questions? I'm talking fast. No? Okay. Let's, sorry, I have other notes I want to look at on my phone. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just reading some things here to make sure I'm covering everything. Okay, yeah, let's move to the playfield. So when we say it's like a modular or a decentralized system, it's also modular, right? So in theory, almost every single one of our games will be with like 2 core nodes. You want to raise the playfield?
I'm going to remove the balls.
Oh. So this is what we call a core node, right? So this is what drives everything on your playfield. Every single game will have 2 of these. In theory, there could be a lot of these in a game. It is modular and it is expandable. So One thing that people always ask me is like, why are there no fuses, right? So one benefit of one interesting thing with these node boards here is that they have an overcurrent system, which we'll go into a little bit. There are circuits on these boards that will measure when too much current is being drawn from an application, right? Like a fuse. That is what a fuse is. When too much current is being drawn, the fuse explodes, protecting everything else. These boards, in a perfect scenario, if something was drawing too much current, the game would be able to sense that and shut that down, thus protecting the device and the board. That is why there are no fuses. Yeah, so other things on this first line, they can drive 9 coils. Each board can drive 64 LEDs off of itself, not including the lamp boards that come off of the serial data chain, which we'll get into. It can control 32 switches and up to 3 separate general illumination strings. Let's see. There's other older boards, like the 8-driver board or the 4-driver board. These are things that you would have seen more commonly in like Spike 1 games, where this is a very common standard piece now. That's why we call it the core node. Some of your older games like Ghostbusters will use, I think Ghostbusters and Game of Thrones might be the only 2 Spike 1 games that use true core nodes like this. Other games will use 8 or 4 drivers, which are just, they drive less coils, right? And other things, right, as described on this slide here. Let's see.
The point is that the system is modular, and you can put in just the nodes it needs. So if the game has, however many switches and however many coils, you don't have to have unnecessary resources tied up doing nothing. If the game has a motor, we can have a little board that does a motor, and if it doesn't have it, we don't need that.
So, okay, so on the node board itself, we'll have 3 status indicators, one being I have 48 volts, one of them saying I have 6 volts or node bus voltage, and the other one says I'm thinking. The yellow one, the boot light. So one thing you will notice here too is, I think this gets into it a little bit later, but these games also do not have switch matrices and they do not have lamp matrices. So in your older Williams games or Data East games or older System Stern games, right, you have a matrix that consists of a lot of wires going from point to point to point to point with a bunch of diodes and a lot of headaches. Who here has wanted to bang their head against the wall solving a lamp matrix issue? I saw a couple small nods, a couple hand raises.
They can be tricky problems if you have a short in your switch matrix where the game thinks you're hitting switches that you're not because of a short. If you're familiar with video games, these are more wired that way, where you just simply have an input, and if it connects to ground, then the computer says, oh, that switch is closed. So it's very simple. Every switch has a ground wire, and then a wire that goes to a node.
So there are still wires, the ground wires are still run in series, which means it starts at this board and then it runs to the first device, and then it runs from that device to the next device, and that device to the next device. So you can have a broken wire problem still, like you would in a switch matrix game, but there is good information in the manual, which is what I'm going to start showing you here soon, as to how we can kind of like find where that is. What's that mean? 2 core nodes. Basically every game we've ever made has 2 core nodes, and then they will have more other like auxiliary nodes, like in Rush, a stepper motor driver board, or in King Kong, there's a servo driver board to drive the servo motors.
You have node 8 does things on the lower half of the playfield. Node 9 down here will tend to do things on the upper half. They've also, helpfully, if you're looking for a broken wire problem, they give you some. Rather than just make all the ground wires black, they will have stripes so that the different groups have different stripe colors to help you, find, oh, it's somewhere on the black-green thing.
It would be kind of fun to have an older game here so you could see if you're not familiar, right, the massive amount of wire that has been taken out of most games. Because now that we aren't doing a whole matrix of switches, it cuts down the wire usage a lot.
The best demonstration of this would be to move a game up a flight of stairs. Who here has moved a game up a flight of stairs, right? Okay, yes. If you move one of these upstairs, it's a joy if you've moved like a Williams 90s game upstairs. The elimination of the transformer, the system that eliminates pounds and pounds of wire, and the fact that the head is steel on 3 sides makes these to where it's a delight to go up a flight of stairs with one.
It truly is. Oh yeah, look, and we just touched on that. Yeah, the cabinet has nothing in it but a speaker, the cabinet node board, and some flipper buttons. That's about it. Let's talk about, okay, so the cabinet node board. That is mounted to the inside left of your cabinet.
Picture up there.
This drives a few things. It drives the start button, it drives the action button, it accepts inputs from the coin door, but not the service buttons. The service buttons are only passed through on the cabinet node board. If you take a look, all those service buttons, they plug into one side of the cabinet node board, and then they come out the other side, and they go straight to the CPU. So in that way, like if the cabinet node board was failed for some reason, you could still use your menu buttons, right? If it wasn't powered and it needed to transmit that via the data bus, that would be bad. That would make it very hard to troubleshoot the games. But yeah, they will, again, your shaker motors are driven from here. They have some outputs. But for the most part, this is driving just the few things here on the front of the cabinet. The flipper buttons do not report to the cabinet node. The flipper buttons report to node 8.
They have a separate disconnect down here since they're by themselves. You would think that everything in the game should only have power and information, just those two plugs. But you have one extra plug to the playfield because the flipper buttons have to come from here up to there.
I do get that a lot when people call in and they know enough to be dangerous, but they don't know the system well enough, and they're like, I can't find the flipper stuff on the cabinet node board. It's like, because it's not there. But they go straight to node number 8, and that is why you have those disconnects down there. Again, we kind of keep a pretty similar nomenclature when it comes to status LEDs. So you're going to have, a red power. You're going to have a yellow I'm thinking. And when this was done, it had a red 12-volt light. That might not be the same on all boards. I think we changed that color, but it's not that important.
You'll notice none of these lights are lit right now, and that's just because I have the door open. If I pull the switch here, they all light up, start thinking.
Yeah, so let's talk about, again, some of the benefits of this system, right? So when you have a problem, generally it will be located on one of those boards that drive, the core nodes that drive the game, right? So again, you don't, we'll get into that part later, sorry. The rest of this, right, we've got no more transformer. These things are lighter. They don't take as much juice. You can plug way more of these into a 20 amp circuit than you could older WPC games. Like those things, what is that, an 8 amp draw?
It's an 8 amp fuse. The amount they draw varies depending on how many lights are on. But yeah, it's like twice the current.
Moving into the 21st century, lots of LEDs and switching power supplies. We're going to skip through some of these things, and I think what we'll do is now let's move into the manual a little bit so we can do some more like hands-on or more demonstration with this game. So how do we read this map? This is important. Chris mentioned something about the node boards driving like essentially the bottom half or the top half of the playfield. Let's take a look here at this diagram. Can I zoom in on this? Nope, but I can here. Oh, geez, sorry. It's like I don't know how to use a computer. Here's a diagram of the Foo Fighters Pro from the underside.
You changed. Oh, there it goes. Sorry.
So let's see how this is read, right? So on the CPU, we had those 2 wires coming out from the data bus. One of them goes to the cabinet node board to communicate with that. The other one starts the data chain on the playfield. So we've got these blue lines here, right? One goes from the CPU, goes into node number 9. Then you've got an output on node number 9, and it goes up to node number 8.
And those are just in parallel. It doesn't really matter what order you physically plug them in, but they do it in the way that uses the least amount of wire usually.
Yep, it is correct. It doesn't matter where those go. People ask, it's like, well, does it go in CN4 or CN5? It doesn't matter.
As long as they all find their way back to the computer.
Yeah, part of it's what they do, right? In the simplest terms is the data from the CPU is sent to the node board, and it is there's something included with it like this data is for this address. This is for this. If it's not going to stay here, it moves it along. So that's why it doesn't matter where they go, because if the data is meant to stay there, it's going to stop at that board. So that's your data bus.
You mentioned addresses.
Yeah.
I was going to add to that. The node boards, I think we mentioned earlier that node 8 and node 9, they're identical boards. And that raises the question, well, how does it know which one it's talking to if the data is all in parallel? There are dip switches on each node that gives it a unique identifier, a unique address. So if you get a new node board and you want to install it here, you need to set the dip switches correctly for node 8. If you have 2 node boards with the dip switches set the same way, the computer will try to talk to both of them at once and things won't work right on the playfield.
it's a really easy troubleshooting tool in this system. So here's a little chart of all these DIP addresses. But if you were to ever suspect, do I have a node board problem? Answer is a lot of the time it's generally not. But if you ever wanted to prove that, you could swap the positions of node 8 and 9. With what Chris was saying, right, you've got the address is number 8, and you'll have 4 switches that you need to set correctly. So for node 8, it would be off, 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 off. Node number 9 would be off, off, on, off. If you needed to test that, right, power off, remove everything from node number 8, unscrew it from the playfield, set the dip switch to be node number 9. Remove node number 9, set the dip switches to be number 8, and just swap them. If the problem follows the board, the problem's with the board. If it doesn't follow the board, the problem's with somewhere in the playfield or on the somewhere in the wiring, and that's one good way to kind of like get that out of the way really quick. Is my problem following this board, or is it staying when I move it? Where was I on this? Oh, we were on the map. The other line that we saw on that map, I'm going the wrong direction, is serial data. This is a little over my head, but to put it simply, there are instructions given out, and we have chains of serial data going into separate node boards. So let's look off of node number 9. This purple dotted line, this is a serial data cable that goes from node number 9 to 9A, then into 9B. These are LED boards. These instructions coming off the board go to these satellite nodes to tell it, it's like, okay, this insert needs to light. That data, though, again, if it's not for that board, it passes along to the next one. What you'll see commonly with a lot of games, I was talking to Manu about Guardians of the Galaxy, a free gold watch. That game has like 6 satellite boards coming off of one of the core nodes. If you have any break in your serial data, so again, a dirty pin, a loose connection, or something, if that break started at, again, at 9A, everything downstream from that is going to be affected. Does that make sense? It's the data is passed along in series, right? So if you have any break, it's going to be a break of instruction going forward. So to put this in like, let's make this make a little more sense.
I can just point it out here if you like.
Go ahead. Start pointing.
Yeah, so here's node 8 up here, which everyone can see better. Coming out this end, you have a couple plugs with mostly purple, red, black, and maybe orange wires. And this is the serial data coming out. And we see one of them goes over to the trough. But anyway, the point, they will jump from here, maybe to this one, and then maybe to that one, and then over to here. And if these lights don't work and these don't work, but these lights work, then yeah, you almost certainly have a problem between here and here. And these plugs, you may have to cut a cable tie or two, but there's these harnesses, identical harnesses are all over the playfield. They're different lengths, but you can always steal one from the upper half of the playfield and test it, between here and here if you need to. And you don't even, you don't have to have anything special to do it with. So
I was wrong. The game I was thinking of is Jurassic Park, but there's a, let's look at something really complicated. Maybe I could give a little real world example of how this works. Actually, I don't remember what game I was thinking of, but let's use it as an example anyway. So let's say your dinosaur on Jurassic Park Premium is no longer moving up and down. Okay, so what could that be? That could be a power problem, right? That could be a bad motor, but it could also be bad data. So how would we test something like that? If you were to call me and tell me that, like, let's do something easy. Let's reseat all the connectors. Let's make sure nothing has jiggled loose. What happened? Does that fix it? No. Okay, well, let's move on and parse it down into, like, separate assemblies. Is the motor good? How do we test that? This is a fun trick. 9-volt battery. Get a 9-volt battery, get some alligator clips, and hook it to the motor. Make sure it's unplugged from the driver board first, but if the motor spins, the motor's good, right? So could it be the driver board? Perhaps. This happens a lot, especially with older Jurassic Parks, is you're going to have a jiggled loose connection here at node 9A.
It's not showing what you're...
Oh, sorry. So let's watch that chain again so that this part will make sense, right? 9A, data from 9 goes up into 9A. If it's not supposed to stay here, it needs to go instruct the driver board. It's going to go out and back over here to the driver board. If you have a crummy connection there, that could be all that's causing that T-Rex to not move up and down anymore, right?
And again, with the 9A is a board with a bunch of LEDs on it. If you go into lamp test or play the game and say, well, all those lights are working correctly, we know the data is getting at least that far and it's good up to that point.
So a lot of the times when people are having LED problems, the number one thing I'll tell them to do is start by reseating the cables on the serial data harness. Start from the node board and just do all of them. Remove the serial data plug from here, replug it in, go out to the next board using your manual. The manual is super, super critical to figuring some of these things out. Plug it back in, unplug that, and just reseat the whole chain. Put it back in lamp test. Does things start working again? They might. Let's see, moving on from that. Yeah. Yeah. So what? Yeah. If you had, so yeah, try that. You could put the game in LED test, like Chris mentioned. Do you have all the LEDs? If you are missing some, that could be part of what is triggering, or that might be the key to solving, right? Like, do I have a serial data problem or not? But again, it's like the best way to troubleshoot these problems is starting at the simplest, freest thing and then moving forward. Replacing a motor driver board that you think might be bad is going to cost you a lot of money. But maybe you could have fixed it by just removing the plug and putting it back on and, save yourself some money.
Yeah, as we've been fixing things, not kind of the rule of thumb for me, because I'm always in a hurry, like I want to figure out the fastest way I can how to find the problem. Because I'm an operator and I'm cheap, I don't want to spend any money if I don't have to. So instead of buying a board and see if that's it, let's see if we can prove whether it's the board or not. For example, on these boards that just have LEDs on them, a lot of these are unique to a game. You look at this one, it's a very unique shape. That's because this particular playfield layout required a board that shape with those LEDs on it. If I wanted to prove whether that was bad or not, and I didn't have another Foo Fighters, like, well, where am I going to get one? Well, these lamp boards generally, it doesn't have to be the right one as long as it has the same number of LEDs on it. The game won't know the difference. It'll simply say, turn on these, however many, 24 LEDs, and then send the data on to whatever's downstream. If you can find any other game you have that has a 24 LED board, you could plug it in and see whether they appear to act correctly or work, and that'll tell you without having to go buy something expensive that's unique. No, they'll almost always, I don't think I've seen one that isn't a multiple of 8. Computers love powers of 2, so it's going to be 8 or 24 or 32 or whatever. They're not always on the board, but they'll be able to drive that many. There'll be so many on the board, and then they'll have a few plugs where they can stick little onesie-twosies off the edge, because it's not practical to make a unique board for every LED on the playfield. So you get these outliers here that will plug onto that. But if you add them all up, it's going to be 16 or 24 or whatever.
Yeah, some of the boards are smart and they have drivers to drive lamps, so it gets the instruction and then it will drive a lamp that is going to be a satellite to that satellite node. But some of them you'll just have, again, serial data coming in and nothing else. Can we put the screen back on really quick? JAWS. JAWS is a nightmare of serial data. Let's just look at this really quick, because this is something that I've had customers contact me for, where the motor is not working. The motor driver board is board 9G. Look at the path. It goes from 9 to 9A, and then to 9B, and then to 9C, and then to 9D, and 9E, and so on, right? So if you have one bad connection between boards 9C and 9D, nothing else downstream is going to work. I'm just, sorry, that this is kind of dumb to pound in, but this is really important to troubleshooting on these games. So
important. I'd also say it's fairly rare, at least given my experience, that you have a problem like that.
It's pretty common with a game that has a lot going on, like JAWS, right? It's because again, you have to take in the factor of the jostling and shipment and stuff. It's my motor doesn't work. It's well, it's new, so it's going to work. Let's figure out where it's at. I've seen this problem a bit, just because there's a long path, and one bad connection can cause some headaches.
Yeah, usually you don't see more than about 3 or 4 sub-nodes coming off the main nodes.
But, okay, let me see the rest of these slides here. Yeah, let's concentrate on the manual now, because a lot of people don't know where to find this information in the manual, so it can be handy. So this is the light switch and driver reference page. This one's going to help you demystify where the location of all that stuff is. Use that to figure out the pathing of the serial data coming from your boards. Here in section 3.1, this is going to be the part number and everything that is mounted under the playfield when it comes to like electronics. So node 0 is your computer. Node 1 is the coin door board, the cabinet node board. Node 4 is your QR scanner. Node number 8 is your lower playfield driver. Node 9 on this game is your the rear of the playfield, and node 12 is generally the topper. So that's where that information is. Here's some driver information. So how do you read this? We're having a problem with our kicking target on Foo Fighters. So what can we learn from number 11 here? Number 11 is the ID and solenoid test. It's called the kicking target. This solenoid is driven off of node 9. The connector on that board is CN8. Its unique signal wire is pin 10, and that is an orange-black wire. And then the voltage supplied to that coil is going to be on pins 1 to 4, and that's going to be a gray-brown wire, right? Then you've got some other coil information. These charts are really handy. It just looks like a lot of word soup, but they are really, really useful for helping you tack down where information is, especially when it's coming to a switch problem. So we've talked about how those wires are run in series, and a small break could cause something downstream from it not to work. So let's see, on our Foo Fighters, let's say the center loop switch isn't working. Okay, so what can we learn from the table here on number 53? Again, switch is number 53. It's called the center loop. It's driven off of node 9. It reports the connector CN11. Its unique signal wire is pin number 9, and it is a tan white wire. The ground, the common wire that's daisy chained, is either on pin 10 or 11 or both, and it's a black-gray wire. So, okay, you look at that switch and everything's hooked up. It still doesn't work. Oh, what else do we need to look at? Using this chart in the manual here, right, we can look and see what other switches are driven off of CN11 on node 9. You've got the overlord left, the overlord right, the overlord opto, the overlord hit target, the center spinner opto. If you were going to try to track down a potential common break, this is going to be the easiest way to figure it out, right? I know where these switches are now, and I need to follow that black-gray wire. You go check all those things and see if it works. See if you can find the break.
So I had an opto switch in the T-Rex head that broke, and it reported an entire node board 9 failure.
Yeah.
So why would that occur versus just saying the switch isn't connected?
So the optos are unique because
They're powered.
They require power, right? So an opto is taking 5 volts from the node board to power the LEDs. That is the same 5 volts that runs all the electronics on that node board. So if suddenly you are shorting 5 volts to ground, that is going to drive the 5 volts on the node board down, and it's going to shut that off to protect itself. And since it doesn't have 5 volts, it can't think, and the node board is down.
This is something I was going to bring up later if we got to it, but yeah, it's as good a time as any since you brought it up. Kyle mentioned earlier that they have the overcurrent protection. And the overcurrent protection is a signal. It's essentially that every driven device can sense the overcurrent condition. So if a coil is drawing too much current, if I was to short this coil together and then drive it, the node, whichever node drives this, would sense within microseconds that something's very wrong and would shut down activity in that node, and then quickly pulse everything to see which one is doing it, and then not use whichever device was doing it. This is awesome, and it can tell where the problem is. And it does that for LEDs, whether they're on boards or by themselves, and it does it for coils or any flash lamps that are driven. But the 5 volts on the node board is not a driven device, it's just a power supply. And if that is shorted, the node board can't know that that's a problem. It can't, I mean, there's things it can't know because it doesn't have one of the power, the voltages it needs. The 5-volt regulator is smart enough to shut down and not hurt anything. The node knows something is wrong, but that's a case where it can't tell you where it is. However, you could start unplugging anything that uses 5 volts from that node, and one at a time, and you'd see like, oh, after a few games, you'd see if I unplug this one, then everything works fine.
Well, where does that go? Then you could go to your manual, open it up and see that whatever it is, CN11 is, oh, that's the T-Rex jaw opto. Okay. Then you could try just unplugging just that opto. You could unplug the transmitter first, and then the receiver, and see which one it is, and you'd eventually conclude that, like, yes, I have a short somewhere on the T-Rex opto receiver, whatever it was.
Yeah, a lot of pinball troubleshooting, it's really easy with the spike system. It's a little harder on older systems, but it is sectionalizing things and removing things and seeing where the problem acts up or comes back. So yeah, like what Chris was saying, it's like, okay, my node board is reporting dead. That's not good. Unplug everything. Just have power and data. Everything. Just leave the power and the data.
Yeah, the power comes in on the power's usually a gray wire. Here's your 48 volts and ground, and here's the data coming in so the computer can talk to it. If you unplugged every other thing from that, and it runs okay, the computer says, oh, everything looks good to me. I mean, you're going to get whatever. It's going to complain that it can't see balls in the trough or can't see what the T-Rex is doing, but it's not going to tell you it's broken like it did before.
If it's communicating back to the CPU, then you know the node board's good, and the problem might be somewhere else.
It will link the same as the other one.
Mm-hmm. So let's keep on the overcurrent thing and maybe using the manual to troubleshoot again. A problem that we have all the time is a intermittent GI short. Has anyone ever had an intermittent GI short on a Spike 2 game? Only TJ. Okay, so a lot of the time what happens is, and Michael Madison, a lot of people, you'll get calls, it's like, I'm playing my game and I hit the flippers and then it goes dark and the flippers die, and then it comes back. What's happening here is there is if you have a small short on like a general illumination socket like this, due to a teeny piece of wire finding its way inside the socket, or something rotating stupid and now it's touching and you have a direct short, but it only happens under vibration, the node board's going to shut itself down to protect itself, and then it will reboot and try to say, hey, where's the problem? But since it's intermittent, because it's vibration dependent, it's going to boot up just fine. Oh, the short's gone, we can play again. And then you're going to hit the flippers in just the right way, and that little wire is going to wiggle around, and it's going to short out the socket. And it's going to say, oh, I need to shut myself down, and do it over and over and over again. It's a real easy thing to solve. It's just kind of time consuming. So let's say it's usually node 8, right? Because you've got a lot of vibration down there with the flippers. A lot of the time it happens to be the bulbs that are under the in-lanes, right? Your return guides.
They're close to the flippers.
And what you'll do is, okay, if we think this is the problem, I'll tell someone. We're going to unplug, go like this, unplug CN15 on node 8. That's your GI feed wire, our feed connector. Do the flippers ever die, again, when you have CN15 unplugged? If no, you've taken away the possibility for it to detect that short, right? So it's going to work, it's never going to shut down. So now it's a matter of figuring out where and what bulbs it is. So we know that we have a short on node 8 on CN15. So we can come into our manual and find the general illumination that's driven on node 8. Here we have it, bottom white GI, 14. Driven on node 8, connect your CN15, blah, blah, blah. You kind of know how to read these now, I think. Then we can take those numbers, 211, 212, and we can go back up to our handy dandy light map, which is the other direction. And you are presented with something kind of crazy, but if we look in these positions, right, let me zoom in a little bit so it's a little easier to see. You see 211, 211, 211, 211, 211. 212, those are all of the positions of all of those lights. So now you kind of have the ammo, right, or the knowledge, like where do I need to look? And what I always suggest to people to do is like, this is annoying. This is an annoying thing to fix because you have to be thorough. What I always recommend people is like, if possible, you just remove every single socket, remove a bulb with a good light, look inside, make sure there's no debris, make sure there's no solder blob that's worked its way somewhere silly. If you are thorough and look through and find, or do a fine-tooth comb sweep, you'll find your problem.
The reason you get this kind of problem is because these, unlike the LEDs, which are all surface mounted on the boards, well, these are LEDs as well, but the point is the general illumination uses a bayonet socket, and you've got two lugs, and they must not touch. So this lug here on the outside must not touch the barrel of the socket. That's a dead short. Now they have shrink tube on here, et cetera, to try to prevent that. And it's about what'll happen. Like say you've got a string of lights across the back top of the playfield, and you wanted to put in arc blades. So you lift the playfield out, and you didn't realize you tweaked one of the lamp sockets, and now the lug's bent over, and you've created a short circuit. And it might even be intermittent. And that's another reason I'll see these is somebody soldering something and drips a blob of solder onto one. We had a socket that was loose. The rivet connection that holds the socket together was loose, and so the two parts were able to touch. I had one not in a spike game, but a customer brought in a Terminator 2 that had an intermittent problem, and he had a nut in the socket under the bulb. Nut. No, I think it was a socket with no bulb in it, but it was a nut that had welded itself into the socket because of the short. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a lot of this is detective work that requires some patience and some ability to kind of understand how can I like section this out. Some games break the rule of node 8 being the bottom and node 9 being the top. For some reason, sometimes node 8 is the left and node 9 is the right. So you have weird problems where you can't, like Chris said, with a GI short on one of the back panel lights, if you think that's your problem, right, you've got a plug that you can disconnect the back panel from. So what I'm trying to like drive into you is like when you're troubleshooting something, with this system you have the ability to really sectionalize and unplug and kind of pinpoint where these problems might be. And that is the best way to troubleshoot.
Can you bring up the page with all the lights on it again? Yeah. Something else I'll point out, if you're used to troubleshooting this type of problem on a WPC game or other games, they would put 18 lamps on a string of general illumination, whereas here they tend not to put more than about, I don't know, 8 or maybe 10 at most. So you can look at this and see all the 2 11s down there, and those are all the places you'll have to look. And if you were to unsolder, say, just the left ones, so like now we know it's one of these 4 versus those 4. If you unsolder these, and then the problem goes away. So it's not nearly as many places to have to look.
Yeah.
Don't forget the ones under the flipper assemblies.
Yes.
Yeah. Those ones can be a little more difficult to service, but it's possible. Not all games have them,
Yeah.
But sometimes they're there. Yeah. How are we doing on time? Hey, we talked a lot.
Yeah.
Any more questions? I really like the question. Oh, thank goodness. Okay.
Is there a reason why the CPU board can't detect which node board went down in the general illumination short, or at least the node board that's maybe causing the area of the problem?
So it can, but not in an intermittent short. If I had some alligator clips right now, and I did a dead short on this, and I held it there, the game would be able to tell me that check GI string 211, because it's constant, right? If it only happens when you hit the flippers, sometimes it doesn't store that data, and systems people are aware of that, and hopefully in the future there might be something to help with that, but I can't speak much more on that. But that's why that can be more frustrating, and you kind of have to figure out where to look as opposed to a constant short, which will always be on the screen.
Add that to the things we'd like to see. Error history where you can go back and say, like, oh yeah, a week ago that happened, and it was this particular string.
Great kind of question. Hi.
Common failures, like if one were to stock some spares, what parts do you see go wrong?
This is another great benefit, right? Is if you have multiple Spike 2 games, and a lot of people tend to, you have 2 boards that are the same in every single game. You can stock a core node, right? Having a core node on hand is handy for troubleshooting. If you have something that is known good, and you're having trouble with something, right, being able to swap it in place just to kind of check that off is pretty handy. I mean, otherwise, like, of course, like, common parts, I mean, flipper parts, right? Everyone knows that. But when we go, like, specific Spike 2 stuff, having a core node on hand is handy. Having a CPU on hand is handy. They are expensive, and it can be budget.
I'd say they're handy, but I wouldn't recommend the average person have a spare.
Optos.
I was going to bring that up, yeah. I don't even recommend you having a spare core node because they don't fail very often. Because you can prove whether it's bad or not by swapping the 2 and then spend the money if you have to.
And that's the other thing too, with multiple Spike 2 games in your collection, you could always, if you're having a problem with the Foo Fighters, you could take one from your Godzilla and put it in, and that would be a known working board. Does the problem follow the board, or does it stay when you install something?
TJ mentioned optos. That is something you can keep around. The optos consist of a transmitter and a receiver. There's one right here in this bracket. You've got an infrared LED that gets 5 volts. Shines infrared light on the receiver, which sees the light, and the middle wire on that connector sends that information, whether the beam made it there or not, back to a node board. These disconnect with a single plug, and they've got a harness on them about 1 foot long, and they're inexpensive. So it helps to have some of those around just because why not? They don't cost much and they occasionally go bad.
They are
Well, they're just very useful for troubleshooting. Oh, TJ has helpfully provided one. You can see here. These do come in a few different flavors. This is the little surface mount one, because sometimes there's just no room to sneak in the one with the plastic holder for the transmitter. This is all surface mount.
So check your games to see which ones you need, but almost every game uses the 515-0215-00 and 01, the transmitter and receiver.
They're the ones that look similar to the ones Williams used with the black and the white little plastic thing that the LED's in. So.
These ones are kind of shaped like a popsicle stick, but they have a notch in them to help them, to keep them from rotating. So these are used in some places, like Chris said, where space is of a concern, but your game might use them, and yeah, they're cheap. I don't know retail costs, but they're not expensive. They're like $10, maybe $12 for each side. Having those on hand would be really handy.
The different types are also interchangeable for testing. You can plug this 3-pin into the other style 3-pin.
Yeah, it won't mount, but electrically it'll still work for test purposes.
Yeah, I always like to explain if you don't know what these are, it's like the garage door opener, so you don't close it on your dog or something when you're trying to close the garage. It sends a beam and then it sees a beam, and if the beam is broken, the game can translate that to something happened, right? So they're hard to troubleshoot. Okay, another thing, this is a good time to bring this up. There's a light on these that will change when you break the beam. That has nothing to do with what the actual circuitry that sends the signal to the computer sees, right? That's a separate circuit. So if you're sitting there and saying, well, my light's going on and off, so it's not my opto. No, do not believe that all the time. It's not.
What that tells you is that your transmitter's working at least, because it was seeing light, it has seen the light that has been broken, but we don't know whether it was able to tell the node board that the light has been broken. But it's probably okay.
Some of the receiver lights on those, especially the smaller ones, will get dimmer or brighter as you adjust them, like on Elvira.
Really?
So as you have a stronger transmitter, the receive light will get brighter.
Huh.
So that's worth keeping in mind.
Interesting. Other questions?
First, thank you for your tech school videos on YouTube. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Appreciate
that.
And I don't know if you can speak to it, but do you have any idea when the service menu updates are going to be started being pushed out to other Spike 2 games?
No, but as you saw last week, we did 2 more titles, Metallica and Dungeons and Dragons. The reason it can't just be a push out immediately is it takes a lot of software support to get those set up.
So have you seen the new menu at all?
Just on the videos.
So, like when we do those things, right? Like now that we have like descriptions of what all these adjustments actually do, right? Someone in software needs to go in and write a description, and then they need to put that in, and that's just time consuming, right? When you have games that have 200 plus feature adjustments, that's a lot of time.
And you look at like King Kong, if you go to the gorilla test, you actually see the gorilla on the screen and like what he's doing and all that stuff has to, it's not just make this look different, they're adding a lot of stuff for each game.
But they are coming to all Spike 2 games, that is correct, eventually?
Eventually,
That
yes.
is the plan, yeah. I can't speak to that 100%, but I mean, that is the goal, right?
Yeah,
So,
yes, it is coming,
Thank
but
you.
it's gonna take time. It's not gonna all hit at once.
Of course.
Because it is a considerable amount of programmer time.
I mean, you did a lot of it, right, Mike?
Mike Pranaccio did the heavy lifting, but I helped design like the look and.
The look and writing some of the descriptions.
Yeah.
Thanks,
yeah.
Mike.
We appreciate it.
But eventually, every Spike 2 game will have it. And,
Right.
Dungeons and Dragons, I think, just picked it up, and
Metallica.
Metallica did, and we got plans of.
Well, I certainly appreciate it. I mean, these games aren't getting any other updates, and it's nice to know that they're still getting love. So
Yeah, they'll all get them for sure.
So the new service menu brings these games into the 21st century with a whole graphical update, the GUI. If you're interested and you don't own one of those games, like I did do a video on YouTube that's pretty brief, but it goes over like what it looks like. So there's a lot of stuff that's moved. So it's going to take a lot of getting used to kind of where to find some of these settings now. But the goal with it was to make it easier. To make it make more sense. Instead of having to go to feature adjustment 185 to adjust the upkicker strength for this coil, right? You go now to adjustments, machine settings, coil adjustments. And now you can adjust all the coils in one menu instead of going between a bunch of different adjustments. Yeah, pretty slick. Anything else?
It drives the same if you're used to doing things quickly and blindly.
except for pushing the service button 7 times to get into switch test. But, so you'll have to retrain your brain for that just a little bit, but it's fine. Yeah, did anyone learn anything?
Yeah.
That was about 50%.
I got one more for you, Kyle.
Hey, Mike.
It should be noted, like, when you said about reseating the SD cards, never do it with the power on, because you could break the card.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about power on. Definitely don't do anything up here with the power on. But you know a cool trick? We said everything runs off of 48 volts, right? The interlock switch removes 48 volts from the entirety of the cabinet. You can work on the game with the interlock switch off. Don't unplug boards, right? But if you need to swap an assembly, or if you need to, you've removed all power from this.
Yeah, playfield and the cabinet node have no power at all right now.
Not on all the games.
Huh?
Not on all of them.
Not on all of them.
Yeah, I mentioned a few earlier from like 2018, 2017, a few of them did not have the door switch.
The interlock switch got added about halfway, or like really early on in Deadpool. So original run Deadpool. So your original Star Wars, Ghostbusters, or Star Wars, Aerosmiths, Batman's won't have, and Guardians won't have interlock switches. So definitely turn the power off there.
May of 2019.
Thank you. How'd you? TJ's got all the good information. But yeah, what else? I mean, I could talk about this for hours, so if you have more questions,
I can mention 3 weird things I've seen. Just real-world examples of 5-volt node bus shorts. One of which you already brought up, okay? Because it was Jurassic Park, dinosaur jaw opto, a screw came loose, the opto's flopping around in there, and it was touching wires touching ground. So 5-volt shorts to ground, the node shuts down, and we had to find it. The other 2 I had were had a customer with a rush. He plays it every so often. Node 8 would shut down. This means that you see the lower half of the playfield go dark momentarily, his flippers die, etc. It's very annoying. It makes the game no fun. So I had him unplug things. The problem was it was extremely intermittent. I was there for like 2.5 hours. We're unplugging things, and we appeared to have it lowered down, that it's down here somewhere. But then we plugged everything back in, and it was still working. And we shrugged and said, "Well, I don't know." But then he called me a few days later and says, "It's doing it again." Anyway, so I was like, "Okay, unplug all these things," and now he would play it for like a week, and then he would say, "Okay, now plug in this one." And we worked our way through that, and it comes down to where he said, "Okay, I think I got it. If I leave just this one unplugged, then it never happens." And what that one was the flash lamp on the right slingshot. And what had happened was the wire to the flash lamp, the 5-volt wire, because it's an LED and it runs on 5 volts. You have the kicker switches here, which are these leaf switches, and they're fairly sharp. The wire had gotten moved at some point, and the sharp part of the switchblade had cut through the red wire, so that when the kicker would kick, maybe it would touch, maybe it wouldn't. So it's very intermittent, but at some point he figured that out, and then we were able to go out there and go, "Oh, well, look, there it is. There's the problem right there." The other one was a man-made problem. This was on a Venom. Venom has locks on the left and right where they keep balls in escrow, and they're read with optical switches. Optical switches have 5 volts to them. Somebody had said, "Oh, somebody online is selling little 3D printed covers to cover up the ugly board for the optos." They remove the nuts, they take the board off, or they take the nuts off, they put the cover on, they put the nuts back on, but they didn't notice that there were little spacers between the board and where it mounts. So now they've tightened their board down, and it moves further this way than it was before, and the header pins are now touching like all these rails and stuff. That's fine. You now have 5 volts on that rail and this ramp, and this isn't the same game, but there's other ramp, and so he had 5 volts on all this stuff all the way up to the bell tower, which is still not a problem until you hit the target right here, and you have to hit it hard because this switch has a ground on it, and if you hit it hard enough, it would touch something, so you would get 5 volts shorter to ground. And he noticed this, and his complaint was like, "Yeah, if I hit that target, everything goes dark." And I was like, "Okay, well, let's look there." And eventually we figured it out. But that's the weird kind of things that could happen. But this was a man-made one, where somebody was an own goal, essentially, where somebody made a mistake putting it back together.
That's insane. That does not happen very often, but it's a goofy one.
And it can't happen by itself, really.
No, yeah, that could not happen by itself. But that's nuts. So, things to take away. Use your manual. Use the manual to figure out where things are and how to sectionalize it. That is really the best way to kind of navigate weird problems when you're when you're trying to figure out why a switch isn't working, why is my game, flickering on and off when I hit the flippers. Those are the two most common things that new owners and most owners will experience because, in my experience, and I think Chris's experience too, the spike system is very reliable. There's not, unless you have fringe cases of certain things, then there's not a lot of, other than, wear and tear, right? A pinball's a game of throwing a steel ball on a wooden playfield that things made of plastic. But electronically, these things are
They're very robust.
Pretty robust.
It's interesting to note that, like, you have, sometimes people are like, oh, I have some LEDs not working. Do you think the LEDs are bad? And it's just, the way to bet is no. I used to be able to tell people, like, I have never, ever seen one of these surface-mounted LEDs on a board fail. I've now seen one fail where we could say, okay, that looks like it actually electrically failed. I've had two that were bad. The other one was one that somebody bumped and knocked it off the board. But only one that actually was like, well, that one went out. And this is after selling hundreds and hundreds of games, and they each have hundreds and hundreds of LEDs. It's just very, very rare that they go bad. The other thing I'd like to point out that Kyle has mentioned all the things that are different about the system, but there's a lot that's the same as far as troubleshooting, in that you have a bunch of coils, they get positive voltage, and if you apply a ground to the other side, they fire. And the lamps are the feature lamps. It's an LED. It's got 5 volts up here, and if you ground the other wire, it's going to light up. And you can use that for troubleshooting, because all this stuff is grounded. You can get a jumper wire and jumper it. Just be sure you're on the right side of the lamp or whatever, but also rest easy in the knowledge that if you ground the 5 volts, the node's just going to shut it down and you won't hurt anything. So that's nice at least. So.
It will protect itself. Yeah, an alligator clip is a really handy thing to troubleshoot the game. If you use your switch chart, again, is the problem with my board or is the problem with something else?
It's never, for the switch, it's never the board. I've never seen a switch problem that was a node board.
But you can always jumper switches, right? So if we needed to test the right in-lane switch on the node board, if you put a alligator clip on CN11 between pin number 6 and pin 11 or 12, and it's in switch test, the game is going to say, hey, that switch closed, right? So it's a lot of the standard troubleshooting stuff, the stuff maybe you could take from other games, your Williams games, your Data East games, Sega games, apply to this system. It's just more robust.
If you can bring the screen back up, I wanted to point out that there are things like the left slingshot, right slingshot share a common ground wire, which is the same color as the end of stroke switches and the shooter lane switch, but they are on different input connector pins.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
So if you lose both of your slingshots, you probably have a bad pin or a broken wire just for that one ground wire. I've seen a bunch of the connectors, older games will have a pin that was crimped poorly, and you get an intermittent connection from that.
Yeah,
but knowing that even though they share the same color, they're different pins.
Okay, that's a good point. I actually never knew that. Thanks for teaching me another thing, TJ.
And that's common, those sets of switches, the slingshots, and strokes, and shooter lane are common across all the games. They're the same.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Any more questions? We're out of time. Okay.
Great presentation, Kyle. Can we
Thank
count
you.
on you to do the same presentation next year at Golden State Pinball Festival for Spike 3?
I'll do one if he doesn't.
That was a very sneaky way of trying to get some dirt.
I'm not going to say anything, but I'm very happy that people showed up to this, and I hope that you learned something and it wasn't just me blabbering. And I would love to do another seminar of some sort or more demonstrations. I love to teach people about pinball because the more people that know things about pinball means the more people that can fix their own games and have a good time, right? It's the funnest part of owning a game is figuring out why it's not working.
All right, that's it for PinTech Live today. Next week we'll be back with some troubleshooting on some actual games. either with the Phils or with Lynn's Arcade. We'll see what we got in the works. Might look at some very nice Totan restoration project. So we'll see. But thanks so much for hanging out, y'all. Like I said at the beginning of the stream, all of these seminars that you see right here are going to be on our Marco Pinball YouTube page as standalone videos, so you can watch them and reference them. Tons of great informative content by all of these technicians. So we're super appreciative for them to spend the time during our party weekend at Golden State to do a little education. So thank y'all so much. We hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend, and we are going to raid Pililu on Twitch. If y'all are on Twitch, stick around, show him some love. He put this awesome Donkey Kong tie mod on King Kong. I love it. So let's go ahead and raid, and maybe that'll work. I'm a bit frozen, and we'll see y'all later.